Hello my friends, and welcome back to another video, where today we are going to be discussing whether the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series could use a dual narrative. Before we start, you might be wondering, what is a dual narrative? Well, it is a form of narrative that tells a story in two different perspectives, and usually from two different people. A dual narrative is also an effective technique that can be used to tell the story of people or one person at two different points in time. So basically, it's when a show either shows the point of view of two different characters in different places, such as in Game of Thrones, where we see the story of Jon Snow and the Starks at Winterfell, and in the story of Daenerys in Essos, but both character perspectives are happening in the same time frame and is happening in the present. Often, in shows that use a dual narrative, at the end of the season/show, the storylines normally come together and the story continues from there. However, in today's video, we're going to be looking at a story being told from two or more perspectives in different periods in time. And there's a difference between the two, between a Game of Thrones approach and a Witcher approach. So the most recent show to adopt this approach is The Witcher, where we change perspective from Geralt to Yennefer and then to Ciri. And while changing perspective, we also change the time in which the events that these characters are in are happening. For example, in one episode, we are seeing the story from Geralt's perspective, but the events that are happening in Geralt's perspective are actually so many years earlier. And then when we look at Ciri's perspective of stuff, her events that she's in are happening in the present. So Geralt is in the past 60s early and Ciri is in the present. And it's okay if right now you don't quite understand, because it is quite a confusing methodology, so don't worry. However, a dual narrative has its pros and cons, and it is debated whether season 1 of The Witcher was successful or not. But let's start with the pros, which is that firstly, by adapting this style of a dual narrative, you can potentially cover a lot more story than you can in a linear narrative, and you can also delve deeper into the character's past and their history, which can add more levels to the character and the story. The cons of a dual narrative is that it can be really risky and often hard to pull off, because if it's not done correctly, then the story may look really confusing to the viewer and they may not be able to follow, and that is where there is a debate to whether season 1 of The Witcher was successful by using this approach. So therefore, there is an element of risk attached to using a dual storyline, because if it is not applied correctly, then for the viewer they will be stuck between timelines and find it hard to figure out which one's the present timeline or if they're currently viewing the past timeline, so it can lead to confusion. Now finally that we've cleared all that up, let's get back to the original question, which was, should the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series use a dual narrative? Well, firstly let's look at the reasons why. The Second Age spans over 3,000 years, and from a linear point of view, this is nearly impossible to adapt, even with the compression of the storyline. To solve this, Amazon can use a dual narrative approach and show the Second Age from different periods of time. By doing this, we can fully see a true representation of the Second Age and see more of the events that happened. Another reason why this could be used is because right now people are debating and questioning whether the show should stick with the elves, as there will have to be massive time jumps, and this will result in us seeing a lot of the Numenorians or men in the show being cut off and removed, because of course they are not eternal like the elves. To solve this problem, Amazon can use a dual narrative to show two different places and people, also in two different places in time. That line may seem a bit confusing. What I mean is, we can see two different perspectives, one from the elves and one from the Numenorians, and the Numenorians could be maybe 1,000 years ahead and the elves can start 1,000 years behind, but because the elves have long lives, well, not even long lives, because they are immortal, we can see the progression through those 1,000 years, while we see the same amount of time happening in Numenor, maybe over 80 years or 100 years. So that is where a dual narrative it can be effective. And as I said before, as elves are immortal from their perspective, we can cover many years, even thousands, and through this we can get character development. Then from the other perspective, which will probably be seen in Numenorians, we can see a time period of Numenor which can cover much less years than the elves. If done correctly, this could tick all boxes, as through the elves' perspective, we could be seeing a lot of the events and moments in the Second Age, like the foundation of Lindon and Mithlon / the Grey Havens, the story of Elrond and Galadriel, the Forging of the Rings, the War of the Elves and Sauron, and many more. Also, as I said before with the dual narrative, near the end of a season / show, the events and stories of these different storylines normally come together and they intertwine. And of course, there is a perfect event for this, which is the War of the Last Alliance, where the Numenorians and Elves of Middle-earth join together in an alliance and fight and defeat Sauron. If the show aims to end with the War of the Last Alliance, then this dual narrative approach could be perfect, as through the Elves we will see a lot of the Second Age, and also get to see Sauron in his different forms, such as Anatar and of course his Sauron form. And especially we can see his events through the Forging of the Rings and the War of the Elves and Sauron. And we get to see the perspective from Numenor, maybe starting 100 years before the War of the Last Alliance. Who knows, that is just one of the many examples that Amazon can use, and this all depends on what choice they make. Also, a dual narrative does not have to have two storylines or two different places in time, and we can have more. For the two storylines, I have only given one example which Amazon can use, and there are so many more, and this all depends on what stories Amazon want to tell in this show, as I am only speculating. Regarding the Numenorian perspective, it is Amazon's choice in which era of Numenor they could show, as unlike the Elven storyline, the time frame has to be much more short and restricted, as even though the Numenorians had a long lifespan, they were not immortal. Amazon can show the foundation of Numenor and the story of Elros, or the downfall of Numenor, or the story of Ar-Pharazôn and Sauron where Numenor becomes corrupted. There are lots of choices which Amazon can choose from. Now with this there are many problems as well. The Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series is a $1 billion show, and Amazon are betting a lot on this show to be successful due to how much this is going to cost them. This might lead to them being as safe as possible with the show, and as we learnt earlier, using a dual storyline can be extremely risky, and if not done correctly can massively confuse the viewer. Therefore, Amazon might go with a safer approach of having a linear storyline and narrative. Another reason why Amazon might not want to use a dual narrative is because they simply don't need to. If the show is, instead of covering the whole of the Second Age, focus on a specific event or time frame, then a dual narrative won't be needed. This is because they will be focusing on a specific event, e.g. the Forging of the Rings, which means they do not need to be in different time frames as the whole story is happening in the present moment. This could be the case as when Amazon were given permission to make a show, they also got an option to have a spin-off after as well, and this spin-off can cover earlier or later events, which means the entire of the Second Age does not need to be covered in the current show. So there are the pros and cons of having a dual storyline. Please let me know your opinions in the comments below, and if Amazon should adopt this approach. I believe that if Amazon are certain that if they did use a dual narrative that they would do it correctly, then I don't mind them using it, as also they have some of the best writers in the world on their writing team. However, I believe that realistically they will not use this approach due to it being too risky. But that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Until the next video, my friends, goodbye.